The old picture of the Neanderthal is a cliché. We all know it. A hulking, brutish figure hunched over, dragging a club. Maybe grunting. A dim-witted cousin who just couldn't compete. For over a century, that was the story we told ourselves. Our own species, Homo sapiens, were the smart ones. We were the innovators, the thinkers, the artists. We were the ones who looked at a cave wall and saw a canvas. Neanderthals, we thought, saw only rock. They were a dead end in evolution, a species defined by what they lacked. They lacked our ingenuity, our creativity, our soul. They certainly lacked art. But what if that picture is completely wrong? What if the evidence, slowly and painstakingly dug from the dirt and chipped from cave walls, tells a different story? A story of a different kind of human, but a human nonetheless. A human who felt the need to make a mark, to decorate their body, to create something that wasn't just a tool for survival. A human who made art. The question is no longer a fringe idea. It's one of the most exciting and contentious topics in human evolution. It forces us to ask what art even is and what it means to be human. Before we go any further, we need to think about that word art. It's a loaded term. If you're picturing the Mona Lisa or Michelangelo's David, then no, Neanderthals didn't do that. But is that the only definition of art? If we define art as the creation of something with symbolic meaning, something that isn't purely functional, then the picture starts to change. It's about abstract thought. It's about seeing a bird's talon not just as a piece of a dead animal, but as a potential necklace. It's about seeing a red mineral not just as dirt, but as a pigment for decorating your skin. It's about looking at a blank wall and feeling an urge to put something there. A line, a dot, a handprint, something that says, I was here. If that's our definition, then the evidence for Neanderthal art becomes much harder to ignore. The story of this changing perception doesn't start with a grand cave painting. It starts with small personal things, things you could hold in your hand. For years, archaeologists found strange objects at Neanderthal sites. Eagle talons with peculiar scratches on them. Seashells found hundreds of miles from the coast, with holes drilled in them. At a site in Krapina, Croatia, scientists found a set of white-tailed eagle talons, all from around 130,000 years ago. These weren't just food scraps, they had cut marks and polish on them, suggesting they had been strung together probably as a necklace or a pendant. Think about that. A Neanderthal didn't just kill and eat an eagle, they saw its powerful talons, a symbol of a fierce predator, and decided to wear them. That is a symbolic act. It's about identity, about sending a message. It's a form of personal expression. It's the beginning of jewelry. And then there are the shells. In southern Spain, at two caves called Cueva de los Aviones and Cueva Anton, researchers found shells that completely changed the game. These shells, dating back to around 115,000 years ago, were not food. They were carefully selected cockle and scallop shells. And we had holes punched in them, right where you'd need one to hang it from a cord. But it's more than that. They also had traces of pigment on them, not just any dirt, but carefully prepared mineral pigments. The red lepidocrocite and yellow goethite, they were painting their beads, they were mixing colors. This isn't an accident. This is deliberate aesthetic choice. This is fashion tens of thousands of years before Homo sapiens are thought to have even arrived in Europe. These Neanderthals were collecting, modifying, and coloring objects to wear on their bodies. If you saw someone today wearing a painted shell necklace, you wouldn't question their capacity for symbolic thought. Why should we question theirs? The use of pigments is a huge piece of the puzzle. We find lumps of ochre and other minerals at Neanderthal sites all over Europe and the Middle East. For a long time, the assumption was that they used it for practical things, like tanning hides or as an adhesive. And they probably did. But the evidence suggests they did more. We find ochre crayons, worn down on one side as if used for drawing. We find shells used as containers, with remnants of different colored pigments mixed together inside, like a prehistoric painter's palette. At a site in the Netherlands, Maastricht Belvedere dated to a staggering 250,000 years ago, archaeologists found a whole collection of reddish fluid and mineral powders. The analysis showed it was hematite, a rich red iron oxide. The Neanderthals there were actively collecting and concentrating this material. What for? The most likely answer is for color. For painting something, maybe their own body. Body painting is one of the oldest and most universal forms of human artistic expression. It's a way to mark identity, to prepare for a ritual, to communicate social status. We can't know for sure if that's what they were doing, but the evidence of them gathering and processing pigments on a large scale is undeniable. They were interested in color in a way that goes beyond simple utility. Of course, jewelry and body paint are one thing. But what about making marks on the world? What about engravings or drawings? For a long time, this was considered the exclusive domain of our species. Anytime an engraving was found at a Neanderthal site, the default assumption was that it was a fluke, a random scratch from a butcher's tool, or that a later group of Homo sapiens had made it. But the evidence kept piling up, becoming harder and harder to dismiss. One of the most famous examples comes from Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar. On the floor of the cave, deep inside, is a carving. It's a series of intersecting lines etched deeply into the dolomite rock. It looks a bit like a modern hashtag or a tic-tac-toe board. Researchers tried to replicate it. They found it wasn't a quick or accidental scratch. It took deliberate, repeated strokes with a stone tool, probably hundreds of them, to carve the lines that deep. It's an abstract pattern. It doesn't represent an animal or a person. It's a design. And it was found in a layer of sediment sealed off by Neanderthal occupation debris dating to around 39,000 years ago. It's a deliberate, symbolic mark placed in a specific spot. It's a composition. Another incredible find came from a German cave called Einhornholy, or Unicorn Cave. There, archaeologists unearthed the foot bone of a giant deer. This wasn't unusual. What was unusual were the markings on it. Carved into the surface was a pattern of 6 stacked lines, a set of chevrons. It looks like a clear, intentional design. The object was dated to over 51,000 years ago, long before modern humans were in the region. The scientists who studied it were meticulous. They examined the grooves under a microscope. They confirmed they were made by human hands with flint tools. They even boiled a similar bone to see if the markings could have been made before or after. They concluded the bone was boiled first to make it softer and easier to carve, and then the pattern was etched in. This level of planning, selecting a bone, preparing it, then executing a specific geometric design is complex behavior. This wasn't a doodle, it was a created object, an artifact with meaning. But the most profound, most earth-shattering evidence has only come to light in the last few years. It takes us from small, portable objects to the one thing everyone thought was ours alone: cave art. For decades, the beautiful paintings of mammoths, bison, and horses in caves like Lascaux and Chauvet in France have been held up as the pinnacle of our ancestors' creativity. They were the proof of the human revolution, a supposed explosion of cognitive ability that happened with the arrival of Homo sapiens. As Neanderthals, it was argued, just didn't have the brains for it. Then, scientists developed a new way of dating cave art. Instead of trying to date the paint itself, which is very difficult, they started dating the thin layers of calcite, a mineral deposit from dripping water, that form on top of the paintings. This method, called uranium-thorium dating, is very precise. It doesn't tell you exactly when the art was made, but it gives you a minimum age. If a layer of calcite covering a painting is 60,000 years old, the painting underneath must be even older. In 2018, a team of researchers used this technique on paintings in 3 different caves in Spain: La Pasiega, Maltravieso, and Ardales. The results were stunning. In La Pasiega, a red ladder-like symbol was dated to be older than 64,800 years. In Maltravieso, a red hand stencil, made by placing a hand on the wall and blowing pigment over it, was older than 66,700 years. In Ardales, red paint on the stalactites and stalagmites was dated to various periods, some older than 65,500 years. These dates are a bombshell. They are more than 20,000 years older than the earliest evidence for Homo sapiens in Europe. At that time, the only humans on the Iberian Peninsula were Neanderthals. There is no other possibility. They were the ones going into the dark, deep parts of caves with torches for light and painting symbols on the walls. The art is not like the later, more famous paintings of animals. It's more abstract. It's lines, dots, and hand stencils, but that doesn't make it less significant. A hand stencil is profoundly symbolic. It is a signature. It is a direct personal mark that says, I am here. This is my hand. The ladder-like shape is a clear, composed symbol. The painted stalagmites show a desire to alter the natural landscape, to mark a space as special. This wasn't accidental, it was intentional. It was tradition. The fact that we see similar types of simple art in 3 different caves, miles apart, suggests this was a widespread cultural behavior among Neanderthal populations. They were cave artists. The evidence for Neanderthal symbolism goes even beyond painting and carving. Perhaps the most enigmatic and awe-inspiring discovery of all lies deep within a cave called Bruniquel in southern France. In 1990, cavers squeezed through a narrow passage and discovered a large chamber that had been sealed off for tens of thousands of years. What they found inside was extraordinary. Someone had gone deep into the cave, more than 300 meters from the entrance, into total darkness. There, they had broken off hundreds of stalagmites, nearly 400 of them, weighing over 2 tons in total, in the 2 large circular structures on the cave floor. One is a large ring nearly 7 meters across, the other is a smaller ring. There are also several smaller piles of stalagmites. All of these pieces were deliberately broken and carefully arranged. And scattered around these structures are traces of fire, deliberately made hearths. Dating of the stalagmites shows that this construction was built around 176,500 years ago. This is an almost unimaginable age. It predates the arrival of modern humans in Europe by over 130,000 years. The builders could only have been Neanderthals. What was this place? It had no practical purpose. It wasn't a shelter. It wasn't a place for butchering animals. The effort required to build it is staggering. A group of Neanderthals had to venture into the dangerous, dark depths of the cave, work together to break all those stalagmites, drag them, and then arrange them according to a specific plan. They had to light the space with fire. This is a massive construction project undertaken for reasons we can only guess at. Was it a ritual space? A meeting place? A kind of shrine? We don't know. But what we do know is that it demonstrates a level of social organization, planning, and symbolic behavior that no one thought Neanderthals were capable of. To create a special place deep underground, separate from the everyday world of sun and sky, is a profoundly human thing to do. It's an act of architecture, an imposition of order on the natural world. It is, in its own way, a work of art. Even their treatment of the dead hints at symbolic thought. The evidence for deliberate Neanderthal burial is still debated by some, but at sites like Shanidar Cave in Iraq and La Chapelle aux Saints in France, we have found Neanderthal skeletons that appear to have been intentionally placed in graves. The famous flower burial at Shanidar, where pollen was found in the soil around a skeleton, was once thought to be proof of a ritual where flowers were laid on the body. While that specific interpretation is now questioned, it could have been brought in by rodentcy. The fact remains that they were often burying their dead. An intentional burial, even a simple one, is a symbolic act. It shows a certain understanding of death, a separation between the living and the dead. It suggests that a dead body was more than just a piece of decaying meat to be left to scavengers. It had to be treated in a certain way. This, too, is part of the world of ritual and symbol, a world that art springs from. So, with all this evidence, the jewelry, the pigments, the engravings, the cave paintings, the underground structures, why is there still any debate? Part of it is just old-fashioned scientific inertia. The image of the dumb brute is over a century old, and it's a hard one to shake. For a long time, the scientific establishment was deeply invested in the idea of our own species' unique cognitive superiority. Every piece of evidence for Neanderthal sophistication was met with intense skepticism. The go-to argument for a long time was that Neanderthals were just copying their new, smarter neighbors, the Homo sapiens. The idea was that as modern humans moved into Europe around 45,000 years ago, Neanderthals saw the cool things they were making and tried to imitate them without really understanding the symbolic meaning. This was known as the acculturation hypothesis. But the new dating has completely demolished that argument. The eagle talon necklace from Crepina is 130,000 years old. The painted shells from Spain are 115,000 years old. The cave paintings are over 65,000 years old. The Brunicle structures are 176,500 years old. All of these predate the arrival of Homo sapiens in those regions by many tens of thousands of years. They weren't copying anyone. They came up with these ideas on their own. This was their culture, their technology, their art. Another argument is that the evidence is too sparse. Compared to the thousands of examples of art from Homo sapiens in the Upper Paleolithic, the Neanderthal examples are few and far between. This is true, but absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Neanderthals lived at much lower population densities than the later Homo sapiens. There were simply fewer of them to create art. It's also possible that much of their art was made with perishable materials, like wood, hides, or feathers, which would have rotted away long ago. What we find in the archaeological record is only a tiny, lucky fraction of what once existed. The fact that we find anything at all is remarkable, and the number of finds is growing every year. So, did Neanderthals create art? The answer seems to be a clear yes. It might not have been the same kind of art that our direct ancestors made. It seems to have been more abstract, more geometric, less focused on realistic depictions of animals. But it was art. It was symbolic. It was born from a mind that was capable of thinking beyond the next meal or the nearest threat. It was the product of a mind that had an aesthetic sense, a need for identity, and an awareness of a world beyond the purely physical. This changes everything. It means that the capacity for art and symbolism is not a unique invention of our own species. It's a much deeper, more ancient part of the human story. It likely evolved long before Homo sapiens ever left Africa. Our common ancestor with the Neanderthals, living perhaps 500,000 years ago, may have already possessed the cognitive seeds of this ability. We and the Neanderthals then took those seeds and cultivated them in our own separate ways on different continents for hundreds of thousands of years. The new Neanderthal that emerges from this evidence is not a brutish failure. They are our equals in a profound way. They were a successful, adaptable, and intelligent type of human who survived for hundreds of thousands of years in the harsh climates of Ice Age Europe. They hunted massive prey, they made complex tools, they cared for their sick and elderly, they buried their dead, and they decorated their world. They looked at a shell and saw a bead. They looked at a feather and saw an ornament. And they looked at a dark cave and saw a sanctuary. In the end, this isn't just a story about Neanderthals. It's a story about us. For so long, we defined ourselves by what made us different, by what made us special. We were the artists, the symbol makers. It was our unique spark that set us apart. But the more we learn about Neanderthals, the more that line blurs. We weren't alone in our ability to create. We shared this planet with another kind of human who also felt the urge to make things beautiful, to make things meaningful. And knowing this doesn't diminish our own species' achievements. It enriches our understanding of the entire human family. It makes the story of our evolution more complex, more interesting, and more humbling. And it makes the fact that they are gone, and we are still here, a little more poignant. We are the last humans left, but we were not the only ones who ever looked at the world and saw more than just a place to survive. We were not the only ones who saw a canvas.